France 24 debate. We're looking at Mohamed Morsi, the president of Egypt, on the day he's making his first trip to Europe since he became the president of Egypt, dealing back home with protests that continue in Cairo. Our panelists, in fact, one of them has been in there among the thick of the crowd. Beltrou reporting that it's a younger crowd today in Cairo. Not so much the Islamists that we've seen in previous days. Also with us from London Exeter University's Omar Ashur. And here in the studio, we're joined by Adel Guindi of Coptic Solidarity, and also Shirin Foti, who teaches law at La Sorbonne, an Egyptian American. Thank you for being with us. All this, of course, all these events happening on September 11th, sparked by a movie. Well, we're not even in fact sure that it is a movie or just a video. We think it's a movie. We've seen trailers in the newsroom on the internet, France 24 electing not to air clips of the badly dubbed scenes that poke fun at Islam. The U.S. Secretary of State, while defending free speech, saying earlier in the day in the company of her Moroccan counterpart that she is not amused by the satire.
To us, to me personally, this video is disgusting and reprehensible. It appears to have a deeply cynical purpose to denigrate a great religion and to provoke rage. But as I said yesterday, there is no justification, none at all, for responding to this video with violence.
Now, it was originally reported as the work of a shadowy Israeli-American named Sam Basile, who'd raised $5 million for the movie. But the Associated Press believes that perhaps Sam Basile doesn't even exist. The search for those behind the provocative anti-Muslim film implicated in violent protests led Wednesday to a California Coptic Christian convicted of financial crimes who acknowledged his role in managing and providing logistics for the production. The Associated Press's story even saying, Adel Guindi, that it might be this man himself who is responsible. These are allegations at this point. We don't know. But obviously, there must be worry inside the Coptic community if the source of this, really this vitriol turns out to have been a Coptic Christian.
Well, yes and no. I mean, if it's him, it's him. I mean, why should anybody else bear the guilt of someone? It's not true at all. All the stories. I mean, that's a very obscure film. I agree with
the film, which has been denounced by the Coptic community in Egypt.
Everybody. I mean, it's a stupid film to start with. It's disgusting. I tried to see the trailer, and after 2-3 minutes, I was so disgusted I stopped. I didn't even see that 12 minutes trailer. All of it is so unprofessional, so disgusting. So be it. There are tons of stuff in the internet, you know, against Christ, against this, against that. I mean, so okay, fine, somebody did it. I mean, to start forming the story to be, you know, like it is. That's another problem of the value set, you know, the collective punishment idea. That if someone from a certain group does something, then it's the whole thing. If it's an American, it's the whole America. Which is, you know, Satan. If it's a Jew, it's going to be to all the Jews in Israel. If it's a Coptic Christian, it's going to be all the Coptic Christians. That's insane. Somebody did something wrong, like all over the place. People do all kinds of things, and so be it. I mean, at the same time, you can see in Cairo, day and night, insults against Christianity, for instance, and just yesterday, the day before, every day, and nothing happens. Nobody can even, you know, if you go complain, nobody listens to you. So, I mean, these kind of double standards and, you know, victimization and attacking this if you do that, but on the other hand, if you do if you touch Islam or scratch it, okay, I repeat, the film is disgusting, but nothing justifies any further attacks or any actions or any generalization of our communities and so on. This is crazy.
Shirin Fati, do you agree that right now in Egypt there is a double standard?
Definitely. I mean, I think that we have to also look at this allegation of a Coptic person being at the origin. And what we've seen...
And it is an allegation.
Right, an allegation, obviously. what we've seen is kind of this attempt to destabilize many Arab countries. We've seen this over and over again. In Iraq, it's the Sunni-Shia divide. Now we see it in Syria with various factions. We've seen it in Lebanon. And of course, in Egypt, it's been a primary tool of trying to destabilize the country, of creating diversions, creating disaccord between various facets of the population that are normally unified, that are normally under the title of Egyptians, not of Coptic Egyptians or Islamic Egyptians. And so I think that's important to keep in mind when viewing this in a particular context. In regards to the expression that was stated or shown in this film, I agree 100%. It's disgusting, it's offensive, and comments by people like presidential candidate Mitt Romney that are not condemning the film, that are supporting the message of the film, or that are failing to condemn it in a public atmosphere, I find that absolutely disgusting. It's being used for political motivation, for political purpose, to gain popularity in the elections, and to fuel this kind of anti-Islamic sentiment in the United States that we've seen time and time again. And both the media, the film industry, the press, all of these institutions are behind this anti-Islamic sentiment that we see over and over again, that uneducated or ignorant Americans adopt very quickly, and that the government fails to state and clearly differentiate between statements of fact and statements of hatred and allegations of anti-Muslim sentiment.
Do you think that film should be banned and the person should be prosecuted?
Well, first and foremost, as a lawyer, I believe entirely in the idea of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So although I disagree vehemently with the statements of the film or the views perpetrated by the film, of course, everyone has the opportunity, not just in the United States, but they should also in Egypt. And I think what was evoked earlier, that this does not exist in the Arab world, this idea of freedom of expression, well, that's a problem. I mean, we've seen why is it that we don't have freedom of expression in the Arab world? It's because of the United States and the Western agenda in the region, and the lack of attention spent on civil society, on a political, enlarging the political structure of the country, giving autonomy to voters, autonomy to individuals in the country, rather than focusing on solely a foreign policy and advancing their agenda in the region.
Beltrou, you mentioned in part one that you saw it was several hundred people this Wednesday who are out there. What about the 89 million or 90 million other Egyptians? How do they handle now freedom of speech and this whole debate that we're having?
I think, freedom of speech was an issue in Egypt, and it was an issue during the Mubarak era, and it continues to be now. As we've seen with the recent crackdowns on the media by Morsi, actually since he took the presidency, there's been an issue like the El Dastor newspaper here. An editor was actually put on trial for saying things that were perceived to be rude to the president and also the Muslim Brotherhood. So, freedom of speech has always been an issue. It's one of the main demands of the revolution. People wanted to have the freedom of expression, to be able to come to the streets, to be able to protest. And as we can see today, people came to protest. Arguably, we don't know who initiated the clashes, but certainly, we've got exactly the same behaviour happening right now in Cairo after a democratically elected president who's supposed to be, relatively revolutionary, is in place. Because basically we haven't seen any reform here. So, it's hard to say, what the millions of Egyptians think as a collective voice. I don't think it's possible. I wouldn't like to comment that myself. But nothing has really changed after President Morsi took power in terms of freedom of speech. Other than what people have gained during the 18 days, which was, the sort of lexicon of revolution, people coming to the streets. But we're still seeing, similar violent crackdowns. I spent, the best part of the morning and the afternoon in these clashes, and it was exactly the same behaviour. The police in large armed vehicles, going for protesters at high speed, surmounting pavements. I've seen birdshot, excessive amounts of tear gas, and these are supposed to be people voicing grievances. So I mean, this is an attack on freedom of speech. So I think in reality here in Egypt, I mean, there is an issue with on one hand censorship in terms of the media, and second hand silencing the streets, or at least trying to pacify it.
Censorship on the one hand and fighting it out in the street on the other. Adel Gindi, your reaction?
I agree with what the young lady says. I mean, but there are two sides for that. There is the administrative and the dictatorial aspect of things, and how freedom of speech is oppressed by Morsi, by his people, the change in the press and so on. We don't want to get on that, but there are also the legal side, the so-called blasphemy rules, or the law is part of the law. There is not a complete law for blasphemy. And it's there, it's oppressive, and it's in fact there is an attempt by the Salafists to put it in the constitution in such a way that, you can't even touch not only, the divinity, but the prophet, the followers, the companions, and so on. Is going to be like Pakistan and Iran if we are not watching. So there are two aspects of the story there.
Omar Ashur, do old habits die hard when it comes to the government cracking down on the freedom of speech on the one hand?
Yeah, there are definitely a few things to be done on the freedom of speech, and as noted earlier. However, there are very significant changes. I mean, there is no comparison between the post-revolution and the pre-revolution era. We have now the president is being called a traitor, is being calls for his toppling. I've done some earlier research on the executions in Egypt, and you had tens of executions, and the primary reason for the execution was calling for the removal of the regime, of toppling the regime. And now you have, publicly the calling for the, armed insurrection at some point by the Stour newspaper, whose editor-in-chief was accused by the general prosecution. And then the president used his legislative powers to get him out of confinement, the temporary confinement, until the trial goes on. So there has been some significant changes in terms of the freedom of speech on one hand, but there is a lot to be done in terms of the freedom of conviction, the freedom of conscience, and so on. But and then the other issue is the security sector reform. Of course, the police now, it's one of the Ministry of Interior is one of the most stagnant pro-continuity institutions in the country. The standard operation procedures are the same. Many of the generals did not change, and the colonels under them. There is no clear criteria of monitoring that institution, and without checks and balances, without transparency, and without holding them accountable, we were likely to see all these violations happening again. But institutional change, as anyone who studied political science knows, takes some time. In terms of legislation, takes some time. In terms of changing institutional culture, takes some time. And what we see right now is a constitution that is being written, where hopefully the end product will be satisfying and will be very clear on the freedom of speech, on the freedom of beliefs, and on security sector reform. But also we have a pro-change forces that can still mobilize the street, some of them are in power. And I think if this maintained, we will be having forward steps on the route of democratic transition and on the route of transforming Egypt once and for all.
And Beltrou, let me ask you, that call to protest after Friday prayers by the Muslim Brotherhood against this movie/video, is that a shrewd move to channel all the anger, or is it part of the double standard that we were describing earlier?
I mean, when this happened, actually, Morsi hadn't, the president, who also obviously hails from the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's his organisation, when that happened, Morsi actually hadn't given any statement about the violence in Libya. So at the time, we thought it was quite a contentious, quite a controversial decision to make, because the president hadn't offered his condolences or condemned any of the violence in Libya, which arguably isn't his role, but to call a protest about on the subject of a protest, to call a protest on the very subject which has brought people to the streets and breached security of embassies, seemed to be quite an unwise move. However, Muslim Brotherhood protests, as they have been seen to be in the last 18 months of transition, have always been relatively controlled. This has been one of their ways of being able to sort of adopt the streets, have a protest which happens in the morning and is finished by about 8 p.m. You bus people in from outside. All the way around Egypt, and they leave by about 8, 9, 10 p.m. and it's very much a controlled, peaceful protest. So you could argue that this is one way of recognising the anger in the streets, and as you said, controlling it in a manageable way. But equally, these protests have been, as we can see in the streets right now, extremely violent. So to encourage them to be sustained till tomorrow perhaps is unwise. We'll have to see what happens on the street tomorrow. I predict tomorrow in Tahrir we will have thousands of people there, but the majority of them will leave by nightfall, as encouraged by the Muslim Brotherhood. And Muslim Brotherhood members tend to follow what the Supreme Guidance Council, who is a sort of decision-making board in the organisation, say. They will leave, and then the stragglers, who will perhaps be led by the ultras or just other disaffected groups, will perhaps continue into the night, and that's where clashes may happen.
All right, Beltrou, and we'll be looking to see whether that prediction comes true this Friday. I want to thank you for joining us from Cairo. I want to thank Omar Ashur for being with us from London, also Shireen Fati for being with us here in our studio, as well as Adel Gindi. By the way, news has just come in that there have been arrests made in Libya in regards to the killing of the U.S. ambassador and 3 other U.S. officials at the consulate in Benghazi. We'll continue to follow that story for you. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.